My name is Benjamin, and I'm a proud father of 4. However, last year, a terrible incident occurred that nearly resulted in the loss of all my children. We were on vacation in Beijing, and it was quite a bustling experience. My kids consisted of 7-year-old twins, a 5-year-old, and a 4-year-old. During the first week, we explored the Great Wall, visited palaces, and strolled through various parks. On that fateful day, we found ourselves in the bustling downtown area, and the kids were exhausted and hungry. I had run out of snacks, and their patience was wearing thin. Scanning the surroundings, I spotted a street food stall. I guided the children to a nearby bench, and then proceeded to purchase some food. However, when I glanced back, the bench was empty. My children had disappeared. Panic set in as I frantically scanned the area, but there was no sign of them anywhere. In my haste to return to the stall, I suddenly felt a sharp pain, and everything went black. When I regained consciousness, I found myself lying on the ground at the same spot where I had felt the stabbing sensation. I quickly got to my feet and rushed back to the bench where I had left my children, only to find it deserted. Desperation washed over me as I called out their names repeatedly, receiving no response. A sickening feeling churned in my stomach. Where could they be? I abandoned the food and continued shouting their names with increasing desperation, standing atop the bench to get a better view of the surroundings teeming with people. Then, in the distance, I noticed something that caught my eye. A little girl in a red coat emerged from behind a building. It was Violet, my youngest, being led away by a stranger. Without a moment's hesitation, I leaped off the bench and sprinted in that direction, inadvertently knocking over a passerby's shopping cart, spilling their groceries everywhere. But I couldn't afford to stop and help. My sole focus was on reaching my daughter. I pushed my way through a swarm of tourists, darting across a bustling street, narrowly avoiding cars and rickshaws, and veered onto a side street. My heart raced as I sprinted down its length, finally spotting a man leading a little girl away. I rushed up to them, grabbed the girl from his grip, only to realize she wasn't Violet. This other child, roughly the same age, was crying and screaming in fear. The man yanked her away from me and erupted in anger, his shouts filling the air. Shock immobilized me, and before I could react, he punched me in the face, and I tumbled to the ground, striking my head. When I eventually regained consciousness, the surroundings were shrouded in darkness. Disoriented and confused, I struggled to piece together my whereabouts. The realization hit me like a sledgehammer. My children were still missing, and I was in a foreign country. Panic surged as I recalled the gravity of the situation. I slumped to the ground in pain, fervently wishing that this was nothing more than a nightmarish dream from which I'd soon awaken. Regrettably, that wasn't the case. As I snapped back to reality, I retrieved my phone from my pocket and attempted to call the police, but it wouldn't connect. I fumbled with my phone, dialing 999 out of habit, forgetting I was in China, not the UK. I had no idea how to reach the Chinese police. Frantic and desperate, I retraced my steps to the city center and located a public security station. My voice trembled as I explained the situation, alternating between cries and pleas for help. The officers, however, couldn't comprehend my words. Eventually, they escorted me to an interrogation room, locking me inside. Time stretched endlessly, with each minute feeling like an eternity. Anxiety gnawed at my sanity as I paced back and forth, my mind spiraling into a frenzy. At long last, the door creaked open, revealing a policeman accompanied by an interpreter. Through tears and trembling voice, I recounted the ordeal to them. They requested descriptions of my children, and I handed over numerous photos from my phone to aid in their search. With that, they abruptly told me to leave. I walked back to the hotel, my footsteps echoing in the deserted streets. It was now the dead of night, too late to resume my search for my children, and too late to call their mother to deliver the horrifying news. You see, her mom was scheduled to join us in 2 days. She had been so proud of me for taking the kids abroad by myself, and now I felt like I had let her down. The following day, I made numerous attempts to call her, but each time it went straight to voicemail. I couldn't bear to leave a message explaining the situation, so I simply asked her to call me back. Then an idea struck me. I recalled that Arya's sister Zoe lived in Beijing and worked at a bank. I sent her a message, urgently requesting to meet. We arranged to have coffee that morning, though I was too overwhelmed to even touch my cup. As soon as I saw her, tears streamed down my face, and I poured out the harrowing story. She was both concerned and taken aback by the news, but she assured me that she would do everything in her power to assist. Zoe even took the day off from work to join me in the search. Together, we returned to the square with photos of the children and approached as many people as we could, explaining their disappearance. Having her as a translator was an immense help. Regrettably, no one had any information about them. We then proceeded to the local police station, where they assured us they were doing everything possible. They advised me to contact the British Embassy and ensure that they could reach me if necessary. Later that evening, Arya phoned me. Delivering the news to her was one of the most heart-wrenching tasks I'd ever faced. Understandably, she was distraught. She informed me that she would be catching a flight as soon as possible. It had been 48 agonizing hours since I lost sight of the children. I felt utterly helpless, unable to think, eat, or sleep. My sole desire was to ensure the safety of my children and prevent any harm from befalling them. Zoe continued to provide invaluable assistance, visiting the airport and speaking with security personnel. Simultaneously, I headed to the British Embassy, desperately seeking aid. I approached the first person I encountered and began explaining that I had lost my children and was at a loss for what to do. The man gently requested that I compose myself and take a breath so they could grasp the full extent of the situation. He made a phone call and directed me to wait in a room. Suddenly, 2 policemen burst in and uttered, "Benjamin, you are under arrest for kidnapping your children." Shock coursed through me, and I couldn't contain my outcry. "This is absurd. I came here to report my children missing, and you're arresting me instead. Why am I being treated like this?" A British officer entered the room and motioned for me to sit down. He proceeded to clarify that Arya had reported my children missing that morning and had accused me of kidnapping them. I vehemently protested, explaining the absurdity of the situation. I had received her explicit consent to take the kids out of the country, and she was scheduled to join us. To my astonishment, I learned that she had informed the officer that we were separated, and she had been forced to return to work after being evicted from our family home. She had no knowledge of my plans to take the children abroad and was deeply concerned for their safety. My panic intensified at this revelation. I sensed that something was terribly wrong, and I needed to find my kids urgently. I made a frantic dash for the door, but the policeman halted me and began shouting at me in Chinese. Soon, other officers arrived to restrain me. The following week, I was repatriated to the UK, placed under house arrest in an apartment while awaiting trial for kidnapping. No one seemed to believe that I was the victim, and that my children had been taken from me. On television, Arya made tearful pleas for her children to be returned to her, and I was terrified to leave the flat, fearing potential confrontations or attacks. Each day was a struggle, as I wondered how much my children had changed during our separation and whether they were safe. It was an agonizing uncertainty I couldn't bear. I felt utterly powerless, unable to contact Arya, and overwhelmed by a profound sense of betrayal. Why had Arya reported that I had taken our children? We had seemed happily married, or so I believed. Maybe she was just as scared as I was about something. Sitting there alone in that apartment, I suddenly thought I saw movement in the corner of my eye. But when I stood up to investigate, there was nothing there. I could have sworn that objects were shifting in the mirror's reflection, but there was no one else in the room. Furthermore, I began hearing strange, indistinct voices, perhaps even my own name being uttered. The whole experience left me paranoid, and I was so troubled that I resorted to searching my symptoms on the internet, only to find that these were examples of hallucinations. I was hallucinating, and it was driving me to question everything about myself. Perhaps I truly was a bad father, and Arya's actions were justified. Endless thoughts swirled through my mind, pushing me to the brink of despair. I blamed myself for not being responsible enough, for losing my own children. I felt like I deserved every misfortune that had befallen me. The self-doubt was overwhelming, and I couldn't bear it any longer. I began to suspect that I had a mental issue, a problem within me that I had ignored for too long. Yes, that's it, I thought. I'm mentally ill, I whispered to myself. I kidnapped my own children. I started crying and screaming, consumed by guilt and despair. But I don't know where they are. My mind was on the verge of breaking. Arya must have known something was terribly wrong with me. That's why she had reported me. I felt an urgent need to confront her, to understand what had happened to me. I felt suffocated by my own torment, yearning for answers about my own mental state. So I decided to call the police and request permission to return to my home under the pretense of retrieving personal belongings. They dispatched 2 officers to escort me there, and as I stepped out of the police car, I couldn't ignore the stares, pointing fingers, and hushed whispers of my neighbors. Their judgmental gazes weighed heavily on me, and I even overheard some of them cursing me for supposedly kidnapping my own children. I was consumed by shame, feeling utterly humiliated. As I ascended the stairs to my apartment, I contemplated surrendering, admitting everything to the police in the hope of making amends. I was prepared to face imprisonment if it meant securing my children's safe return to their mother. However, before confronting Arya, I felt a pressing need to speak with her. As I entered our house, memories of happier times together flooded my mind. The warmth of our shared moments and the echoes of our children's laughter filled the air. Although the officers stood guard outside, ensuring that I wouldn't approach Arya, I couldn't abide by their restriction. I had to speak with her. Pretending to gather some belongings, I made my way through the house, stealthily searching for her. My heart raced as I finally caught sight of her standing in the hallway. Arya was engaged in a phone call, completely unaware of my presence. Hiding behind the shoe closet, I couldn't help but overhear her conversation. My jaw dropped as I listened in disbelief. Arya was having an affair. She addressed the person on the other end as Nathan, saying, "Nathan, my love, don't worry. It will all be over soon, and we can finally be together." Shock coursed through me. Anger welled up, but I knew I needed to remain composed and find a rational solution to extricate myself from this tangled web of emotions. Yet I couldn't wholly fault her. Her husband was struggling with mental illness and had allegedly kidnapped their children. Perhaps she deserved a chance at happiness. On my way home, I was still reeling from the day's revelations. Sleep eluded me, and I tossed and turned throughout the night. It had been a day filled with unexpected discoveries, and I concluded that seeking professional help was imperative. I opened up to the police, not yet confessing to my actions, but explaining how the turmoil had been taking a toll on my mental well-being and how I had a right to see a doctor. The authorities obliged, and police officers escorted me to a psychiatric hospital. To preserve my privacy, I entered the doctor's office alone. The doctor had previously worked with my wife, especially after the birth of our first child. During our conversation, he excused himself briefly, leaving me alone in his office. My gaze wandered around, and I spotted a file on his desk with my wife's full name on it. Although it was hidden, I was certain it bore Arya's name. Overwhelmed by curiosity, I surreptitiously took the file and read its contents, which revealed that my wife had been diagnosed with dissociative identity disorder. I found myself grappling with a rare and bewildering condition, dissociative identity disorder, where a person can possess multiple distinct personalities within their own body. It was a staggering revelation, and I questioned why this was unfolding in my life. What had I done to deserve such a perplexing situation? I struggled to regain my composure and think logically. Ultimately, I made the difficult decision to contact the police and divulge every detail because I felt utterly helpless without their guidance and intervention. The authorities launched a thorough investigation into the matter, confirming that my wife indeed suffered from DID, a condition in which one of her alter personalities had gained ascendancy. This particular alter, identifying as Gavin, had taken control and had recently become more dominant. To my shock, Gavin had orchestrated the abduction of our children, all part of a sinister plot to eliminate Arya's family, including me, and live with her boyfriend, Nathan. The weight of this revelation was crushing. We had been a happy family, preparing for an enjoyable vacation, and it had all unraveled in unimaginable ways. I found myself without a wife and children, left to grapple with the chaos that had unfolded. There was a glimmer of solace, though. I eventually managed to locate my children, who were safely returned home. Thankfully, Nathan had not harmed them during their ordeal. Arya, or rather Gavin and Nathan, were both apprehended and were now facing the consequences of their actions. Arya was undergoing treatment at a mental hospital, while Nathan found himself behind bars. However, despite the relief of having my children back, I was left wrestling with a torrent of emotions and unanswered questions. The most troubling of all was my uncertainty regarding Arya's culpability. I grappled with whether or not to visit her, and whether it would be appropriate for our children to see her. These decisions weighed heavily on my heart, leaving me in a state of profound turmoil.